You know that feeling when someone says something so incredibly rude to you and you just freeze, your mind goes blank, your heart starts racing, and in that moment, all you can think is, I should say something. I need to say something. Why can't I think of anything to say? And then, hours later, when you're in the shower or lying in bed, the perfect response finally comes to you, but it's too late. The moment is gone, and you're left replaying that interaction over and over again, wishing you could go back in time and leave that rude person absolutely speechless instead. I know that feeling. I've lived that feeling, and I'm here to tell you, it ends today, because the truth is, rude people count on that moment of shock. They rely on your stunned silence. They expect your confusion, your hurt, your inability to respond. That's their power. And today, we're going to take it away from them. When someone is rude to you, when they cut you down, dismiss you, belittle you in front of others, they're not just being impolite, they're making a power move. They're establishing dominance. They're telling everyone in the room that you're someone who can be stepped on, and every second you spend shocked, hurt, speechless, you're letting them win. But here's what they don't know, what they'll never see coming. You're about to become a person who can't be rattled, who can't be thrown off balance, who responds to rudeness with such precise, calm devastation that they'll never, ever try it again. This isn't about clever comebacks or rehearsed one-liners. This is deeper. This is about rewiring how you respond under pressure, about developing a psychological toolkit that turns you from reactor to strategist. Take a deep breath right now and feel that knot in your stomach when you think about those moments where someone's rudeness left you speechless, that burning sensation of humiliation, that replay loop that keeps you up at night. Hold on to that feeling, because we're going to transform it into something powerful. The first thing you need to understand is that rudeness is rarely about you. It's about them, about their insecurities, their need for control, their desperate grab for status or attention. When you recognize this, when you truly internalize it, their words start to lose their sting. Think about the last person who was dramatically rude to you. What do you know about their life, their struggles, their insecurities? I guarantee there's something there, some wound they're carrying that's driving their behavior. This isn't about excusing them, it's about seeing them clearly, about recognizing that you're dealing with someone who's operating from weakness, not strength, from fear, not confidence. And that realization, that's your first weapon. Because when you see the insecurity behind their rudeness, it becomes almost impossible for them to intimidate you. The second crucial understanding is that timing is everything. Most people get this completely wrong. They think the goal is to respond instantly with the perfect comeback. But that's playing on their field, by their rules. What if, instead, you slowed everything down? What if you let a deliberate silence hang in the air after their rudeness? 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 7 seconds. Just looking at them with calm curiosity, like a scientist observing an interesting specimen. That silence, that deliberate pause, it creates a vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so do rude people. They expect immediate reaction, anger, hurt, defensiveness, anything they can, used to maintain control of the interaction. When you deny them that, when you simply hold their gaze with neutral interest, you're communicating something powerful. I am choosing how to respond to you. I am not reactive. I am in control. That pause does something else too. It gives you time. Time to move past that initial shock. Time for your brain to come back online. Time to choose your response rather than simply react. But what happens after that powerful pause? What do you actually say to leave them speechless? This is where most advice fails miserably. because it gives you generic comebacks, scripted responses that may or may not fit your specific situation. That's not what we're doing here. Instead, I want to give you a framework, a structure you can adapt to any situation, with any rude person, in any context. It starts with a simple question, not asked defensively, not asked with hurt or confusion, but asked with genuine curiosity, as if you're truly interested in the answer. What exactly did you mean by that? This question accomplishes something powerful. It forces them to either 1. Explain their rudeness, which almost always makes it sound worse when stated explicitly. 2. Deny that it was rude, which makes them look cowardly. Or 3. Apologize, which immediately rebalances the power dynamic in your favor. All 3 outcomes shift control back to you. All 3 put them on the defensive. And all 3 demonstrate to everyone watching that you can't be easily rattled. But here's the key. This question must be delivered with the right tone, not angry, not hurt, not sarcastic, but with calm, genuine curiosity, as if you're giving them the benefit of the doubt that perhaps you misunderstood. This approach is especially powerful with passive-aggressive comments or veiled insults. It drags their rudeness into the light where it can't survive scrutiny. What exactly did you mean when you said my presentation was interesting? I'm curious what you meant by that comment about my experience level. Could you clarify what you meant when you said people like you? Watch what happens. They'll squirm, they'll backpedal, they'll try to reframe, but they won't have the impact they were counting on, because you've changed the game. And that's just the beginning. Now let's take this deeper, because that initial question is just the first move in what I call conversational chess. You've made them explain their rudeness. You've shifted from defense to offense. But now you need to cement your position. This is where most people mess up. They get a small victory, and then they let their emotions take over. They get angry. They get defensive. They try to hurt the other person back. And in that moment, they hand back all the power they just gained. Don't make that mistake. Instead, after they've stumbled through explaining their rude comment, after they've backpedaled or tried to reframe it, I want you to deploy what I call the reflected observation. It goes like this. That's interesting. Most people wouldn't feel comfortable saying something like that in public. Do you see what this does? It's not attacking them directly. It's not calling them rude. It's making an observation about social norms that forces them to see themselves through the eyes of others, to recognize that their behavior falls outside acceptable boundaries. The key phrase, most people wouldn't, implies that they are somehow different, separate from the norm. It triggers a primal fear. We all have the fear of social exclusion. And here's the devastating part. It does all this while maintaining your position of calm control, of someone making an objective observation rather than becoming emotionally reactive. That combination, it's psychological kryptonite to the rude person who expected to dominate you with their comment. But what if they double down? What if they try to defend their rudeness? What if they say something like, "I'm just being honest," or "You're too sensitive"? This is where you deploy what I call the curious probe, a question that exposes the deeper issue while maintaining your composure. I'm curious, do you find that approach works well for you in professional settings? I wonder, do you speak to everyone this way, or am I getting special treatment? That's interesting. In your experience, does that kind of comment typically build strong relationships? These questions do something powerful. They shift the focus from the content of their rudeness to the nature of their behavior. They force a meta-conversation, a discussion about the discussion, and in doing so, they position you as someone evaluating their social competence, rather than reacting to their words. It's a subtle but devastating power shift. and the entire time, your tone remains genuinely curious, not sarcastic, not angry, but like an anthropologist studying an unusual cultural practice, interested but not emotionally invested. Now, let's talk about body language, because what you say is only half the equation. How you will say it, how you hold yourself in these moments, that's what sells it. When someone is rude to you, your instinct is to physically retreat, to step back, to cross your arms, to look down or away, to make yourself smaller. I want you to do the exact opposite. Stand your ground. Literally. Don't step back an inch. Keep your posture open, arms uncrossed, shoulders relaxed but squared. Maintain comfortable eye contact, not staring them down. Aggressively, but not breaking away either. This physical positioning sends a clear message before you ever open your mouth. I am not intimidated by you. And when you do speak, slow everything down. Lower your voice slightly, both in volume and pitch. People expecting an emotional reaction will raise their voice. By lowering yours, you create immediate contrast that draws attention and projects authority. Use deliberate pauses between your sentences. These pauses accomplish two things. They make the other person uncomfortable. Most people rush to fill silence, and they give weight to your words. What's delivered slowly seems more important than what's rushed. Let's put this all together with a real example. Imagine you're in a meeting and a colleague says something dismissive like, "We all appreciate your enthusiasm, but those of us with actual experience know this approach won't work." The old you might have felt that immediate sting, that flush of embarrassment, that pressure to either defend yourself or retreat in humiliation. The new you pause. 3, 4, 5 seconds of deliberate silence. You maintain eye contact with a slightly curious expression. Then, in a calm, measured tone, slightly lower than your normal speaking voice, "What exactly do you mean by those of us with actual experience?" They fumble. They backpedal. They try to soften what they said. You listen attentively, nodding slightly. Then, "That's interesting. Most professionals I know tend to address concerns privately rather than making comments like that in group settings." Another pause, letting that sink in. Then the curious probe, "I'm wondering, has that approach to giving feedback been effective for you in building team relationships?" See what's happened. In the span of 3 statements, you've completely reversed the power dynamic. You've gone from being the target to being the one evaluating their social competence. You've remained calm while they've become defensive. You've demonstrated to everyone in that room that you can't be easily rattled or dismissed. And you've done it all without becoming emotional, without making accusations, without lowering yourself to their level of rudeness. That's how you leave someone speechless, not with clever insults or angry reactions, but with calm, deliberate responses that shift the entire framework of the interaction. But here's where many people struggle: their own emotions. Because let's be honest, when someone is rude to you, you feel things: anger, hurt, embarrassment, indignation, and those emotions create internal pressure. They demand expression. So what do you do with those feelings in the moment? Here's the truth about emotions that nobody tells you. They don't have to control your external response. You can feel the rage, the humiliation, the hurt, and still choose your visible reaction. Your feelings and your behaviors can be separate things. This separation, this gap between what you feel and what you show, that's where your power lies. So when that rush of emotion comes, and it will come, I want you to practice something I call internal acknowledgement, external control. Silently name what you're feeling to yourself. This is anger arising. This is embarrassment. This is the urge to defend myself. This silent naming creates a crucial bit of space between you and the emotion. It prevents you from becoming the feeling. You're not angry, you're experiencing anger. You're not humiliated. You're noticing feelings of humiliation. That small shift in perspective, it's everything. Because once you can observe your emotions, rather than being consumed by them, you can make strategic choices about which ones to express, when and how. And here's something counterintuitive. Some emotions are actually useful to show in controlled amounts, not the raw reactive versions, but the deliberate chosen expressions. For instance, controlled disappointment can be devastatingly effective against rudeness. Not hurt, not anger, but genuine disappointment, as if you expected better from them. I have to say, I'm disappointed to hear that kind of comment from you. I've always held you in higher regard than that. This response does something powerful. It positions you not as the victim of their rudeness, but as someone who was evaluating them and found them lacking. It flips the entire dynamic of who is judging whom. But for this to work, the disappointment must appear genuine, not performative. It must come across as the considered reaction of someone who has standards, not the emotional reaction of someone who is wounded. Another emotion that can be strategically powerful is mild curiosity tinged with amusement, as if their rudeness is an interesting sociological phenomenon rather than a personal attack. That's a fascinating approach to professional interaction. Do you find it usually achieves your intended outcome? This controlled display communicates something devastating. Their rudeness is so ineffective that it doesn't even trigger the emotional response they were aiming for. Instead, it's merely interesting, like an unusual bug specimen under glass. But what about the emotions you choose not to display? The hurt, the rage, the humiliation that you're containing. Where do they go? You need a physical outlet for these emotions that doesn't derail your strategic response. Here's what works in the moment. Focus on the physical sensations in your body, the tightness in your chest, the heat in your face, the tension in your shoulders. While maintaining your external composure, intensely feel these physical sensations. Don't fight them, that only increases their power. Instead, observe them with focused attention while continuing your measured external response. This dual awareness, maintaining strategic external control while allowing yourself to fully feel the internal sensations, prevents emotional pressure from building to the point where it overwhelms your chosen response. Later, when you're alone, you can process these emotions fully, write them out, speak them aloud, move your body to release the physical tension they created. But in the moment of confrontation, this dual awareness approach keeps you strategically effective while preventing emotional suppression from taking a long-term toll. Now let's go deeper into specific scenarios, because the framework changes slightly depending on the type of rudeness you're facing. Let's start with the public underminer. This is the person who disguises their attacks as helpful feedback or just being honest in group settings. Their goal is to diminish you in front of others while maintaining plausible deniability. With this type, after your initial "what exactly did you mean by that?" and their inevitable backpedaling, you add a new element, the public boundary. I appreciate feedback, but I prefer to receive it privately and specifically. If you have concrete suggestions, I'd welcome setting up a time to discuss them one-on-one. This accomplishes several things simultaneously. It calls out their inappropriate behavior without accusing them directly. It establishes your standards for how you expect to be treated, and it offers a constructive alternative that they'll almost certainly avoid taking you up on, because their goal was public undermining, not actual improvement. The key is delivering this boundary with calm certainty, not as a request, but as a statement of how professional interactions will proceed with you going forward. Then there's the passive-aggressive sniper. This person would never say anything overtly rude, but they specialize in comments with double meanings, backhanded compliments, and implications that sting while maintaining deniability. That outfit is so brave for someone your age. I'm impressed you're tackling such a complex project with your background. Don't worry about the presentation too much. Everyone knows you're trying your best. These comments are designed to leave you feeling undermined while making you look oversensitive if you object. They're particularly challenging because they're delivered with a smile and can be easily reframed as just trying to be supportive. With this type, your approach shifts. Instead of asking what they meant, which gives them room to claim innocent intentions, you use what I call the clarification request. Could you clarify what you mean about someone my age? I'm interested in what aspects of my background you're referring to. What specifically gives you the impression I'm worried about the presentation? The key difference is that you're not asking for their intent. What did you mean by that? But for specific details about the content of their statement. This forces them to either explicitly state their insult, which makes them look overtly rude, or backtrack in a way that exposes the passive-aggressive nature of their comment. Follow this with the simple observation: that's not typically how colleagues communicate in professional settings. Notice there's no accusation of rudeness, no emotional reaction, just a calm observation about social norms that makes them aware their behavior is being evaluated and found lacking. Then there's the chronic interrupter, the person who constantly talks over you, cuts you off, or dismisses your points before you can complete them. This form of rudeness is about power and control. They're literally attempting to silence your voice while amplifying their own. With this type, direct questions won't work as effectively because their entire strategy is to prevent you from finishing your thoughts. Instead, you need what I call the pattern interrupt. When they cut you off, you maintain eye contact with the group, not the interrupter. Raise your hand slightly and say with calm certainty, "I wasn't finished with my point, as I was saying." Then continue exactly where you left off without acknowledging the interruption further. If they interrupt again immediately, that's when you deploy the direct address. "I've noticed you've interrupted me several times now. I'd like to finish my thought before responding to your points." The key is maintaining complete calm while being absolutely firm. No anger, no defensiveness. Just clear, unmovable expectation that you will be allowed to complete your thought. What makes this approach so effective is that most interrupters are counting on social discomfort around confrontation. They expect that others, including you, will find it easier to let them dominate than to directly address the behavior. When you calmly but firmly refuse to participate in that dynamic, they lose their primary tool. Now let's talk about something that most people completely miss when dealing with rudeness: the audience. Because rudeness rarely happens in a vacuum. There are almost always witnesses, observers, other people who are watching this interaction unfold. And those observers, they're not passive. They're making judgments, forming opinions, deciding who has status and who doesn't based on how this exchange plays out. Understanding this changes everything, because suddenly your response isn't just about the rude person, it's about the impression you're creating for everyone else in that environment. When someone is rude to you in front of others, there's a moment, a critical moment, where everyone is watching to see how you'll respond. In that moment, they're subconsciously asking themselves, is this person someone who can be disrespected without consequence, or someone who commands respect? Your response answers that question not just for the rude person, but for everyone witnessing the interaction. This is why remaining calm is so crucial, not just because it keeps you strategic, but because composed responses signal high status. Emotional reactivity signals low status. It's hardwired into our social perception. Think about the people with the highest status in any environment you've been in. When challenged or disrespected, do they explode with emotion? Do they become defensive, or do they respond with calm control that suggests the other person has made a significant miscalculation? That calm in the face of provocation. It signals something primal to everyone watching. This person doesn't need to become emotional because they're secure in their position. They have power. So when you respond to rudeness with composed precision rather than emotional reaction, you're not just affecting the dynamic with the rude person. You're reshaping how everyone present perceives your status. But there's another level to this, something even more subtle and powerful. The concept of frame control. The frame is the underlying context that gives meaning to an interaction. When someone is rude to you, they're attempting to establish a frame where they have the right to judge you, to diminish you, to set your value. Most people accept and operate within this frame automatically. They defend themselves. They try to prove their worth. They react emotionally. All of these responses tacitly accept the premise that the rude person has the authority to evaluate them. But what if you simply didn't accept that frame? What if instead you established a completely different context for the interaction? This is what the techniques we've discussed are really doing. When you ask, what exactly did you mean by that? You're shifting from their frame, I have the right to judge you, to your frame, I'm evaluating the appropriateness of your communication. When you follow with most professionals don't communicate that way in these settings, you're cementing your frame where you're the one assessing social standards, not them. This frame control, it's devastatingly effective because it happens beneath conscious awareness. The rude person suddenly finds themselves playing by your rules without quite understanding how the shift occurred. Now, let's talk about a specific type of rudeness that can be particularly challenging, the status-based dismissal. This is when someone uses their position, experience, or some other status marker to dismiss your contribution without actually engaging with its content. When you've been in this industry as long as I have, you'll understand why that won't work. Those of us with advanced degrees take a different approach to these problems. The executives have already considered and rejected that kind of thinking. These dismissals attempt to place you in a lower status category where your ideas don't merit serious consideration. The implied message is, you lack something: experience, education, authority that would make your contribution valuable. With this type of rudeness, you need a response that challenges the validity of the status hierarchy they're invoking without seeming defensive. This is where you deploy what I call status judo, using their own status move against them. That's interesting. In my experience, the most established professionals tend to evaluate ideas on their merits rather than dismissing them based on who proposed them. But perhaps you've encountered a different standard in your work. This response does something powerful. It implies that their behavior is actually signaling lower status than they think. It suggests that truly secure, high-status individuals don't need to rely on dismissive tactics. They can engage with ideas directly, and it does all this while maintaining a tone of genuine curiosity rather than accusation. This status judo works because it disrupts their entire framework. They were attempting to diminish you by invoking a status hierarchy. You've suggested that their very act of doing so, it leaves them in an impossible position. Either continue with the dismissive approach now that you've named it as a marker of insecurity, or abandon their original tactic and actually engage with your ideas, which was your goal all along. Let's look at another challenging scenario: the personal attack disguised as concern. This is when someone makes a comment about your appearance, personality, or capabilities framed as Have you considered that your outfit might be sending the wrong message in this environment? support while delivering a clear undermining message. With this type, you need a response that forces them to either abandon the facade of concern or explicitly state their criticism. I appreciate concerns when they're specific. What exactly about my presentation style seems potentially problematic to you? What specific message do you believe my outfit is sending, and what would you recommend? Could you clarify which challenges you're referring to and how they might impact this project? Then, regardless of their response, follow with, I'm always open to specific, actionable feedback delivered privately. Vague concerns raised publicly tend to be less helpful. This accomplishes several things at once. It forces them to be specific rather than hiding behind implications. It establishes your boundary about how feedback should be delivered, and it subtly calls attention to the public nature of their concern, highlighting its actual purpose. But there's a more provocative approach you can take with this type of rudeness, what I call the spotlight return. This works particularly well when the concern touches on something personal or potentially embarrassing. When they express their concern about something personal, pause, look at them with genuine curiosity and ask, why are you so interested in my appearance, personal defeat? This simple question accomplishes something devastating. It shifts the spotlight from your potential embarrassment to their inappropriate focus. It suggests there's something unusual or even inappropriate about their level of interest in this aspect of you. The power of this response is that it works regardless of their intent. If they were being genuinely concerned, they can clarify their professional reason for raising the issue. If they were being passive-aggressive, they're now in the uncomfortable position of having their focus on your personal attributes questioned. Either way, you've reclaimed control of the interaction and shifted away from defensiveness without becoming emotional or unprofessional. Let's talk about something that makes people extremely uncomfortable: the deliberate, strategic use of silence. Most of us have a deeply ingrained fear of silence in social situations. We rush to fill it. We feel responsible for keeping conversation flowing. We'd rather say almost anything than let that silence hang in the air. Rude people know this instinctively. They rely on it. They throw out their little barbs, their cut-in remarks, their dismissive comments, and they count on your discomfort with silence to force you into a reactive response. What if, instead, you simply looked at them and said nothing? I don't mean for a second or two. I mean for an uncomfortably long time. 5 seconds, 7 seconds, 10 seconds. Just looking at them with a slightly curious expression, head tilted slightly, as if you're trying to figure out a puzzle. Try it right now. Count to 10 slowly in your head. Feel how long that actually is in a social situation. That extended silence accomplishes something remarkable. It suggests that their comment was so bizarre, so out of bounds, so unexpected that you're genuinely trying to process what would make someone say such a thing. It communicates without a single word that they have violated a social norm so significantly that you're momentarily at a loss for how to respond. And here's the beautiful part. In that silence, they will almost always begin to backpedal, to clarify, to soften what they said. Sometimes they'll even apologize without you saying a word, because that silence creates unbearable pressure. This technique is particularly effective with what I call the drive-by rudeness, those quick, cutting remarks that people make as they're moving through a conversation, assuming you won't have time to address them properly. When you respond with extended silence, you force a full stop. You create space where there was supposed to be rushed movement. You make it impossible to just drop the rudeness and continue as if nothing happened. But the power of silence goes even deeper. It communicates something profound about your relationship with power itself. People who are insecure in their status talk too much. They over-explain. They fill space with words because they're uncomfortable with their position. People who are secure in their power use silence strategically. They understand that making others wait for their response is itself a display of status. So when you respond to rudeness with poised, comfortable silence, you're communicating something primal about the power dynamic between you. You're saying without words, I don't need to rush my response to you. I am comfortable making you wait. That's the kind of non-verbal cue that registers deep in the human psyche. Now, let's talk about a specific type of rude person that many find extremely difficult to handle. The one with positional power over you. The boss, the client, the important family member. The person who can make decisions that materially affect your life. When the rude person has power over you, the dynamics change. The stakes are higher. The potential consequences of standing up for yourself can feel more serious. But here's the critical insight: allowing continued rudeness from someone with power over you doesn't make you safer. It makes you more vulnerable. It establishes a pattern where they know they can treat you with disrespect without consequence. So how do you respond effectively while protecting your position? The key is what I call respectful strength, maintaining absolute professional courtesy while firmly establishing boundaries. When a boss or client says something rude, your response needs to thread a delicate needle. It must address the inappropriate communication without challenging their position or creating unnecessary conflict. This is where framing becomes crucial. Rather than addressing the rudeness directly, frame your response in terms of effective communication and mutual goals. I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly so I can address your concerns properly. When you say rephrase their rude comment, what specific aspects of the project are you most concerned about? This response does several things simultaneously. It demonstrates your commitment to the work and their priorities. It shifts from the personal attack to the substance of the issue, and it forces them to articulate actual concerns rather than just expressing frustration in a personal way. Follow this with, I find I can address concerns most effectively when they're expressed specifically rather than personally. Would it be helpful if I outlined my current approach and the reasoning behind it? This establishes your boundary about communication style while immediately offering a constructive alternative focused on mutual goals. The power of this approach is that it's almost impossible to object to reasonably. Who could argue against clearer communication and focus on shared objectives? But what if they continue with the rude approach despite your redirection? That's when you deploy what I call the documented clarification. This is particularly effective in workplace settings. I want to make sure I'm addressing your actual concerns rather than misinterpreting your comments. Would it be helpful if I sent a follow-up email summarizing what I understand your main points to be, along with my planned response to each? This accomplishes something powerful. It signals that their rudeness will now leave a record, that their personal attacks will be transformed into documented communication that others might potentially see. Most workplace bullies rely on the privacy of one-on-one interactions or the ambiguity of verbal communication. The moment you introduce documentation, you change the dynamic entirely. This approach isn't confrontational. It's framed entirely as ensuring effective communication and alignment. But the subtext is clear. Your rudeness will no longer remain private and deniable. Now let's address something that many people struggle with: the sudden, unexpected rude comment that seems to come out of nowhere. The ambush that leaves you blindsided and speechless. The key to handling these surprise attacks is having a universal initial response ready. Something you can say automatically while your brain catches up with what just happened. This is what I call your default bridge, a response that acknowledges you've heard them, while buying you crucial seconds to formulate your actual strategy. That's an interesting way to express that. I'm trying to understand the intent behind that comment. That's certainly a direct way of putting it. These bridges accomplish several things. They acknowledge the comment without accepting its premise. They signal that you're evaluating their communication rather than being wounded by it. And most importantly, they give you precious seconds to move from shocked reaction to strategic response. The delivery is crucial here. These phrases must be spoken calmly, with genuine curiosity rather than sarcasm or anger. The slight head tilt, the thoughtful expression, these non-verbal cues reinforce that you're assessing their behavior rather than being victimized by it. After your bridge, you can deploy any of the strategies we've discussed, but now from a position of collected thought rather than emotional reaction. One of the most powerful approaches after your bridge is what I call the pattern observation. This is particularly effective with people who are repeatedly rude to you. I've noticed this is the third time you've made a comment about my appearance in a professional setting. I'm curious about the pattern. What makes the pattern observation so devastatingly effective is that it shifts the focus from the individual rude comment to the behavior pattern itself. It suggests you've been quietly monitoring their behavior over time, noticing things they perhaps thought were isolated incidents. There's something unsettling about realizing someone has been observing your behavior patterns. It creates a sense that you've revealed more about yourself than you intended to. And when delivered calmly without accusation, it forces them to consider how their behavior appears from an outside perspective. Not just the impact of a single comment, but the picture. Their overall pattern is painting of who they are. I've noticed you tend to make dismissive comments when presented with new ideas. It's becoming a pattern in our meetings. This is the third time you've interrupted me specifically while not doing the same with others. I'm curious about that pattern. I've observed that your tone becomes particularly sharp when discussing projects led by women. It's an interesting pattern. The power move here is that you're not just responding to what they just said. You're putting it in the context of who they repeatedly show themselves to be. You're highlighting that their behavior has been witnessed, noted, and evaluated over time. Most people can dismiss feedback about a single incident. It's much harder to dismiss observations about consistent patterns in their behavior. But here's something crucial about this approach. It must be delivered without emotion, not as an accusation, but as a neutral observation of an interesting phenomenon. The moment you inject anger or hurt, you transform from observer to victim in the social dynamic. Now let's talk about something that few people understand about these interactions: the importance of narrative control. When someone is rude to you, they're attempting to establish a particular narrative, one where they have the right to diminish you, where their judgment of you matters, where you are somehow deserving of their disrespect. Most responses to rudeness operate within that narrative. They try to defend against it, to disprove it, to show why it's unfair. But here's the thing: any response that engages with their narrative ultimately strengthens it. What if, instead, you simply introduced a completely different narrative, one that makes their rudeness irrelevant to the conversation you're actually having? This is what I call narrative redirection, and it's one of the most powerful techniques for leaving a rude person not just speechless, but disoriented. It works like this: when someone makes a rude comment, acknowledge that you heard it, then immediately pivot to a completely different frame of reference that you control. For example, if someone makes a dismissive comment about your presentation style in a meeting, you might say, "I notice you have thoughts about presentation styles. That reminds me, I've been meaning to discuss the metrics from last quarter that suggest our approach is working exceptionally well. The client specifically mentioned they appreciated the clarity of communication. Let me share those numbers with you. What have you done here?" You've acknowledged their comment without giving it importance. Then you've immediately redirected to a narrative where your approach is being validated by actual results and client feedback. You've shifted from defending your style to highlighting its effectiveness. The rude person is now in an impossible position. If they try to return to their criticism, they look petty and focused on style over substance. If they engage with your new narrative about results, they've abandoned their original attempt to diminish you. Either way, you've taken control of where the conversation goes next. This technique works in personal contexts too. If someone makes a rude comment about your parenting at a family gathering, you might say, "I hear you have opinions about parenting approaches. That reminds me, Ethan's teacher just sent home a beautiful note about his empathy with other children. Let me share what she wrote." Again, you've acknowledged their comment without accepting its importance, then immediately redirected to evidence that contradicts their implied criticism. The beauty of narrative redirection is that it doesn't argue with their rudeness directly. It simply makes it irrelevant to the conversation you're now having. Now, let's address a specific challenge many people face, the group dynamic where one person's rudeness emboldens others to pile on. The pack behavior that can quickly transform a single rude comment into a deeply humiliating experience. The key to handling this situation is understanding that packs need a leader. If you can effectively respond to the initial aggressor, the others will often retreat without you needing to address them individually. This is where the direct focus technique becomes crucial. When the first person makes a rude comment and you sense others might join in, maintain absolute focus on the original speaker. Make and hold eye contact specifically with them. Address your response solely to them. Act as if the others aren't even part of this interaction. "John, I'm interested in understanding what specifically prompted that comment." This focused attention accomplishes several things simultaneously. It isolates the rude person, rather than allowing them the comfort of group support. It signals to others that joining in will mean facing the same direct attention, and it prevents the diffusion of responsibility that makes pile-on behavior feel safe. By refusing to distribute your attention across multiple people, you force the original aggressor to own their rudeness fully without the shield of group participation. Follow this with what I call the single question isolation, a question directed specifically at the original rude person that forces them to either defend or retreat from their comment. "What was your intention in making that comment, John?" The power of this question is that it focuses not on the content of their rudeness, but on their motivation for it. It suggests you're not wounded by what they said, but rather curious about what would make someone choose to communicate that way. This shifts everyone's attention from evaluating you to evaluating their behavior and motivation. It transforms them from aggressor to subject of examination, and critically, it makes anyone considering joining in reconsider whether they want their own intentions scrutinized in this way. Let's talk about something that can be particularly challenging: the rude person who knows you well. The colleague who's worked with you for years, the family member who knows your insecurities, the friend turned competitor who understands exactly where your vulnerable spots are. These people are dangerous because their rudeness can be precisely targeted. They know exactly what comments will land with maximum impact, what references will trigger old wounds, what comparisons will hurt the most. With this type of sophisticated rudeness, you need a response that acknowledges the depth of your history while establishing new boundaries. This is where the history recognition pivot becomes powerful. We've known each other long enough that you're aware of how that comment would land. Given our history, I'm curious about your choice to go there. This response does something subtle but profound. It acknowledges the shared history, but uses that very acknowledgement to highlight the deliberate nature of their rudeness. It suggests that their comment wasn't a mistake or oversight, it was a calculated choice to use their knowledge of you as a weapon. By naming this dynamic calmly, you transform from vulnerable target to perceptive observer. You signal that you see not just their rudeness, but the calculation behind it, and that level of perception, that ability to see beyond the comment to the strategy behind it. That's what truly leaves someone speechless. Let's talk about something that most people completely miss when dealing with rude people. The tremendous power of a well-timed, genuinely amused laugh. Not a nervous laugh, not a sarcastic laugh, but a brief, authentic chuckle of genuine amusement, as if they've just said something unintentionally funny. When someone says something deliberately rude, the absolute last response they're expecting is for you to find it entertaining. They want shock, hurt, anger, defensiveness, any sign that they've landed their blow. When instead you respond with a small, genuine laugh, as if they've made a minor social faux pas that you find more amusing than offensive, it completely disrupts their expected pattern. This laugh communicates something devastating. Your attempt to hurt me is so ineffective that it's actually entertaining. Follow this with a slight head shake and a transition to an entirely different topic, not defensively, but as if their comment was so irrelevant it doesn't even merit direct response. That's an interesting approach. Anyway, about the Johnson Project. This combination, the authentic laugh followed by topic change, it's like psychological judo. You've used their own force against them by treating their serious attack as a failed attempt at humor, then denied them the satisfaction of seeing you engage with it at all. But for this to work, the laugh must be genuine. Not forced, not exaggerated, not sarcastic. Just a brief, authentic expression of actual amusement at the absurdity of their approach. Practice this, seriously. Find a private space and practice responding to imagined rude comments with a small, genuine laugh followed by topic change. Make it muscle memory so it's available when you need it. Now, let's talk about a specific category of rudeness that many find particularly difficult to handle: the public correction. This is when someone corrects you in front of others in a way designed to diminish your credibility rather than actually improve accuracy. Actually, those numbers from the report aren't quite right. I think you're confusing the Stevenson account with the Robertson account. That's not exactly how the policy works. These corrections often contain just enough truth to seem legitimate, but they're delivered in a way intended to undermine rather than assist. With this type of rudeness, you need a response that addresses the substance while calling attention to the inappropriate delivery. This is where what I call the substance-style split becomes powerful. You might be right about that detail, let's verify it together, but I'm curious about your choice to address it this way rather than simply providing the information. This response does several things simultaneously. It shows you're committed to accuracy, not ego. It suggests you're open to correction when warranted, but it also explicitly names the problematic approach they've taken. It separates the content of their correction from the manner of delivery, and by expressing curiosity about their choice of delivery method, you're again shifting focus from the substance of the conversation to an examination of their behavior, putting them under the microscope rather than yourself. Follow this with a direct suggestion for more constructive future interaction. In the future, I'd appreciate a quick private note if you notice something like that. It would achieve the same accuracy without disrupting the flow of the meeting. Would that work for you? This isn't asking permission, it's offering them a constructive alternative while implicitly making it clear that the current approach is unacceptable. The beauty of this response is that it positions you as reasonable and focused on group effectiveness while making their rudeness appear disruptive to collaborative goals. Now let's address one of the most challenging forms of rudeness, the false concern trolling. This is when someone expresses worry about you that's actually designed to plant seeds of doubt about your capabilities, appearance, or decisions. I'm just concerned that you might be taking on too much with your limitations. I worry that hairstyle might not be sending the right message for someone at your level. I'm just not sure if you have the experience for a challenge like this, and I'd hate to see you fail. These comments are particularly insidious because they're wrapped in the language of care, while delivering a clear message of doubt or criticism. With this type of rudeness, direct questioning about their meaning gives them too much room to claim benign intent. Instead, you need what I call the assumption flip, a response that takes their expressed concern at absolute face value while completely rejecting the implied criticism. I appreciate your interest in my workload management. My system is actually working exceptionally well for me, but if I need advice on that front, I'll definitely let you know. Thanks for your attention to professional presentation. I've received very positive feedback on my choices in that area, but it's interesting to hear different perspectives. I understand the project is challenging. That's precisely why I'm excited about it. My background is actually perfectly suited for exactly these kinds of complex situations. The power of the assumption flip is that it acknowledges their comment as if it were genuinely helpful, while simultaneously asserting your competence and gently closing the door on further assistance in that area. It denies them the satisfaction of seeing you defensive while making it clear that their assessment has been considered and dismissed. The tone here is crucial, warm, confident, and slightly dismissive, as if you're responding to a well-intentioned but ultimately unnecessary offer of help from someone not fully informed about your capabilities. Let's go deeper into a particularly challenging scenario. When the rude person has an audience they're performing for, because sometimes the rudeness isn't really about you at all, it's about how the aggressor appears to others. They're using you as a prop in their own status display. In these situations, understanding the audience dynamic changes everything. The rude person isn't trying to hurt you personally, they're trying to elevate themselves in the eyes of others by diminishing you. This is where what I call the public service announcement becomes devastatingly effective. When someone makes a rude comment clearly meant to impress others at your expense, look around at the audience briefly, then address the entire group rather than just the rude person. I've noticed an interesting social dynamic happening right now that might be educational for all of us to observe. What just happened was a classic status maneuver where someone attempts to elevate their position by publicly diminishing someone else. It's fascinating from a social psychology perspective, but not particularly effective in professional settings. This accomplishes something remarkable. It transforms you from the target of their rudeness into an expert observer commenting on their behavior. It educates the audience about what they're witnessing, making it impossible for them to be unconsciously influenced by the status play. And most devastatingly, it removes any possibility of the rude person achieving their goal of status elevation through your diminishment. Instead, they've now become an object lesson in primitive social maneuvering. The key to making this work is delivering it with genuine intellectual interest rather than emotional reaction, as if you're an anthropologist observing an interesting tribal custom rather than someone who was personally attacked. Now, let's talk about something that many people struggle with in these situations, the physical response to rudeness, because your body reacts before your mind fully processes what's happening. Your heart rate increases, your breathing gets shallow, your face may flush, your hands might tremble slightly. These physical responses aren't just uncomfortable, they can undermine your strategic verbal response if they're visible to others. Here's a technique that can help you manage these physical reactions in the moment: the micro-grounding. This is a subtle physical reset you can do without anyone noticing. When you feel that flush of physical reaction to rudeness, press your feet firmly into the floor. While taking a slow breath through your nose, feel the pressure against your feet, the solidity of the ground beneath you. While doing this, slightly press your tongue against the roof of your mouth. These physical actions activate your parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest response that counters the adrenaline spike of the fight or flight reaction. The beauty of this technique is that it's completely invisible to observers. No one can tell you're doing it, but it gives you a momentary reset that can prevent visible signs of being rattled. Practice this regularly in non-stressful situations so it becomes automatic when you need it. The goal isn't to suppress your emotions, but to prevent them from hijacking your strategic response in critical moments. There's something almost magical about a technique I call the unexpected pleasant response. It's counterintuitive. It feels wrong when you first try it, but it can be absolutely devastating when deployed correctly. Here's how it works. When someone is deliberately, unmistakably rude to you, respond with genuine warmth and appreciation, not sarcasm, not passive aggression, but authentic calm, positivity. Thank you for sharing that perspective. It's given me something valuable to consider. I appreciate you being so direct about your thoughts on this. That's an interesting point of view. Thank you for feeling comfortable enough to express it. What makes this so powerful is the complete mismatch between their attack and your response. They threw a punch, you offered a handshake. The cognitive dissonance this creates is profound. But here's the critical part that most people miss. This only works if it's genuine. The moment there's a hint of sarcasm or passive aggression in your delivery, the entire effect is lost. The power comes precisely from the authenticity of your positive response to their negative behavior. This approach accomplishes several things simultaneously. It denies them the emotional reaction they were seeking. It maintains your position of composed dignity. And most powerfully, it makes them look like the aggressor against someone who is being nothing but pleasant. That contrasts their rudeness against your warmth. It's visible to everyone watching, and it shifts how the entire interaction is perceived. But there's something deeper happening here too. When you respond to rudeness with unexpected warmth, you're demonstrating something profound about your psychological position, that you're so secure in your worth that their attempt to diminish you doesn't even register as a threat. Think about what that communicates, what that reveals about the power dynamic between you. They needed to attack you to feel powerful. You were so unbothered by their attack that you could respond with kindness. Who appears more powerful in that exchange? Now let's talk about a specific category of rude person that many find particularly challenging: the historical rudeness invoker. This is the person who brings up your past mistakes, failures, or embarrassing moments to diminish you in the present. Aren't you the one who completely mishandled the Atkinson account last year? Didn't you have that meltdown in the Q3 meeting about the budget cuts? Isn't this similar to that failed approach you championed at your last company? These comments are designed to undermine your current position by connecting it to past difficulties. They attempt to create a pattern narrative where your past defines your present and future. When facing this type of rudeness, most people make a critical mistake. They become defensive about the past incident. They explain, they justify, they try to reframe what happened, and in doing so, they accept the premise that their past is relevant to the current situation. Instead, deploy what I call the temporal boundary, a response that firmly separates past from present while acknowledging growth. That situation from last year provided valuable lessons that have informed the much more robust approach I'm presenting today. I'm curious though, do you have specific thoughts about the current proposal? This accomplishes several things. It briefly acknowledges the past without dwelling on it. It positions past difficulties as growth opportunities rather than defining failures. And most importantly, it firmly redirects focus to the present matter at hand. The temporal boundary establishes that you are not the same person you were during that past incident. You've evolved, learned, grown. It denies them the power to collapse your past, present, and future into a single narrative of inadequacy. Follow this with a direct question about the current situation that forces them to either engage with the present topic or reveal that they have nothing substantive to contribute beyond bringing up history. Now, let's talk about workplace bullies who use their position or relationship with leadership to shield their rudeness. These are people who make comments like, "I was just discussing your performance with Sarah, the boss, yesterday." The executive team has some concerns about this approach. Michael, the CEO, and I were talking about this department and wondering if these invocations of authority are designed to intimidate you into silence or compliance. They suggest that powers above you have already formed negative opinions, so resistance is futile. With this type of rudeness, you need a response that neither accepts their implied authority nor directly challenges it. This is where the validation request becomes powerful. "That's interesting. Since you've discussed this with Sarah, I'd welcome sitting down with both of you together to get her direct feedback. Should I schedule that meeting? I always value the executive team's input. Could you share which executives expressed concerns so I can address them directly? I appreciate your conversation with Michael. I'd love to join you next time to understand his thoughts firsthand. When do you typically meet with him?" The power of this response is that it appears collaborative while actually calling their bluff. If they're exaggerating or fabricating these authority conversations, they'll suddenly backpedal. If the conversations were real but misrepresented, they'll be reluctant to have you speak directly with the authority figure. Either way, you've countered their implied threat not by becoming defensive, but by showing authentic interest in direct communication with the invoked authorities. Let's explore something counterintuitive but incredibly powerful: strategic vulnerability. Most people believe that showing any vulnerability to a rude person is a mistake, that you should maintain an impenetrable facade of strength. But there's another approach that, when used correctly, can be unexpectedly disarming. Strategic vulnerability involves acknowledging the legitimate core of a criticism while rejecting the rudeness of its delivery. It looks like this: "You've touched on something I actually have been working to improve. Your delivery made it difficult to appreciate the valid point behind it, but I'm genuinely interested in constructive feedback on that aspect of my work." This response does something sophisticated. It separates their potentially valid observation from their inappropriate method of expressing it. It demonstrates your commitment to growth while establishing boundaries about how feedback should be delivered. The key is being genuine about the vulnerability while firm about the boundary. You're not apologizing for who you are. You're acknowledging your continuous growth while requiring respectful communication. This approach is particularly effective because it's so unexpected. Rude people are prepared for defensiveness or counterattacks. They have no script for someone who can acknowledge a legitimate point while simultaneously calling out inappropriate delivery. It leaves them in an impossible position. If they continue with rudeness, they look petty and focused on attacking rather than helping. If they shift to constructive feedback, they've abandoned their original rude approach and entered a conversation you've now framed. Either way, you've transformed the dynamic from their attack on you to your evaluation of their communication style. Now, let's address a modern challenge that's becoming increasingly common: rudeness in digital communications, text messages, emails, comments, social media posts. These written forms of rudeness present both unique challenges and unique opportunities. The challenge is that written rudeness can be reviewed repeatedly, screenshotted, shared, and sometimes feels more permanent than spoken words. It can reach you at any time, often when you're unprepared, checking your phone before bed or first thing in the morning. But digital rudeness also presents a unique opportunity, time, unlike in-person interactions, where immediate response is expected. Digital communications allow you to pause, breathe, and craft your response strategically. Never ever respond to digital rudeness in the heat of emotion. The temporary satisfaction of an angry response isn't worth the permanent record it creates. Instead, deploy what I call the written reflection mirror, a response that captures and reflects their communication pattern back to them. I've read your message several times and noticed its particularly hostile tone. I'm trying to understand if that was your intention or if something might have been lost in written communication. This accomplishes several things. It signals that you've taken time to consider their message. Rather than reacting emotionally, it names the hostile tone directly rather than ignoring it, and it offers a small opportunity for them to claim miscommunication rather than deliberate rudeness. If they continue with the hostile approach, follow with, "I'm making note that you've confirmed your intention to communicate in this manner. I'll be adjusting my expectations and response protocols accordingly." This seemingly neutral, almost technical language actually communicates something powerful, that their behavior is being documented and will have consequences for how you engage with them going forward. The formality of this language, in contrast to their likely emotional rudeness, creates a striking power differential in the exchange. It positions you as methodical and strategic while framing them as reactive and uncontrolled. Let me tell you about a technique that's so simple, yet so psychologically devastating, that it can leave even the most practiced verbal bullies completely disarmed. I call it selective incomprehension. Here's how it works. When someone says something deliberately rude to you, particularly something with a subtle or implied insult, you respond as if you genuinely don't understand what they're trying to say. Not in a sarcastic way, not with anger, but with authentic seeming confusion and a request for clarification. "I'm sorry, I don't quite understand what you're trying to say. Could you explain what you mean by that?" When they try to explain, you continue to appear slightly confused, forcing them to make their rudeness increasingly explicit. "I'm still not following. Are you saying that?" This technique is powerful because it forces them to do one of two things: either abandon their rudeness entirely, or make it so blatant that it becomes uncomfortable for everyone involved, including them. Most rude comments rely on implication, on plausible deniability, on the gray area between what was literally said and what was clearly meant. When you refuse to fill in those gaps, when you force them to make their rudeness completely explicit, you remove that protection. And here's the beautiful part. The more they try to explain, the worse they look. Each attempt to clarify their rude comment only digs them deeper into a hole of their own making. It's like you're holding up a mirror that reflects not just their words, but the intention behind them. And most people, when forced to confront the naked reality of their own rudeness, become profoundly uncomfortable. But for this to work, your confusion must appear genuine, not exaggerated, not performative, but the authentic confusion of someone who is giving them the benefit of the doubt that surely they couldn't have meant something so inappropriate. Now, let's talk about a particularly difficult scenario: the rude stranger in public, the person who cuts in line and makes a nasty comment, the driver who rolls down their window to insult you, the person who makes a loud, derogatory observation about you in a store. These situations are challenging because, 1, You have no ongoing relationship to consider. 2. The interaction is often brief and unexpected. 3. There are usually witnesses. 4. Your safety might be a consideration. With rude strangers, your response needs to account for all these factors. This is where what I call the public boundary becomes essential. That's an inappropriate way to speak to someone you don't know. I'm going to continue my day now. This response does several things at once. It clearly names their behavior as unacceptable. It emphasizes the boundary violation of their rudeness toward a stranger, and it firmly closes the interaction without escalation. The key is the calm, matter-of-fact delivery, not emotional, not aggressive, but with the clear confidence of someone stating an obvious truth that doesn't require debate or discussion. Then, and this is crucial, you physically disengage, you turn away, you continue what you were doing, you deny them the continued interaction they're seeking. This approach is particularly effective because it denies them what most public rudeness is: seeking a scene, an emotional reaction, a power exchange where they can feel dominant through your discomfort or anger. By naming their behavior, setting your boundary, and immediately disengaging, you've denied them the entire payoff they were seeking from the interaction. But what about situations where you can't physically leave, where you're seated next to the rude person on a plane, where you're stuck in a long line together, where complete disengagement isn't an option? This is where what I call the minimum viable response becomes your best strategy. This approach involves 1. Acknowledging their comment with the smallest possible response, perhaps just a brief "I see" or even just a neutral "hmm." 2. Immediately redirecting your attention to something else: your phone, a book, the view out the window, anything that signals your disinterest. 3. If they continue, explicitly naming the boundary once: "I'm not interested in this conversation." 4. Beyond that, treating any further comments from them as literal background noise. No more acknowledgement at all. This approach denies them the emotional engagement they're seeking while minimizing your own investment in the interaction. It communicates clearly: you have not captured my attention or disrupted my equilibrium with your rudeness. Now, let's talk about something more subtle but incredibly powerful: the concept of presence in these confrontations. Most people, when faced with rudeness, experience a subtle but significant shift in their presence. They become smaller, their voice gets higher or quicker, their movements become more frantic or nervous, their breathing becomes shallow. These changes are often barely perceptible consciously, but they register clearly in the social subconscious. They signal vulnerability, defensiveness, emotional reactivity. What if, instead, you did the opposite? What if you responded to rudeness by becoming more present, more grounded, more physically settled? Try this. The next time someone says something rude to you, before you respond verbally, take a slow, deep breath. Feel your feet connecting firmly to the floor. Roll your shoulders back slightly. Lower your voice both in pitch and volume. These physical adjustments signal something powerful to both the rude person and any observers: that their comment has not destabilized you, that you remain fully present, fully in command of yourself. From this grounded physical state, your verbal response carries an entirely different weight. The same words delivered from this centered presence land differently than when spoken from a reactive, defensive posture. This is why the techniques we've discussed aren't just about what you say. They're about how you embody what you say, about the congruence between your words and your physical presence. Let's go deeper into the psychological dynamics of these interactions, because when someone is rude to you, what they're often seeking is validation of their own importance. Their rudeness is an attempt to make themselves significant in your world, to force you to react to them, to think about them to be emotionally affected by them. What if you denied them that significance entirely? This is what I call the significance denial, a response that communicates through both words and demeanor that their attempt to impact you has failed completely. It looks like this. After their rude comment, you look at them briefly as if noticing them for the first time, then simply say, "That's not particularly significant to me," before returning your attention to whatever you were doing before. The power of this response is that it doesn't engage with the content of their rudeness at all. It doesn't defend. It doesn't counterattack. It simply denies the basic premise that their opinion matters enough to merit a substantive response. This approach is particularly effective with people who use rudeness as a way to make themselves feel important or powerful. By explicitly denying them that feeling of significance, you remove the entire payoff they were seeking. But here's something critical about all these techniques. They require a certain inner stillness to execute effectively. If you're internally rattled, externally frantic, emotionally reactive, these approaches won't work. They'll come across as performances rather than authentic responses. So how do you develop that inner stillness? That capacity to remain centered when someone is deliberately trying to unbalance you. It starts with understanding this fundamental truth. Most rudeness says far more about the person delivering it than about you. When you truly internalize this, when you genuinely see their rudeness as their own psychological limitation rather than an accurate reflection of your worth, it becomes much easier to remain unmoved by it. Practice this perspective shift daily. When someone is rude, silently remind yourself, this is revealing something about their limitations, not mine. This isn't just positive thinking. It's a factual reframing that aligns with psychological reality. Consistently rude people are almost always operating from their own insecurities, their own need for control, their own limited emotional tools. Seeing their rudeness through this lens doesn't excuse it, but it does disarm its power to disturb your center. Have you ever noticed that the most devastating responses to rudeness aren't clever comebacks or emotional reactions? They're precise questions, delivered with calm curiosity, that force the rude person to examine their own behavior. I want to teach you what I call precision questioning, a technique so powerful that it can leave even the most practiced verbal bullies fumbling for words. It works like this. When someone says something rude, respond with a question that targets the exact motivation behind their comment. Not vaguely, not generally, but with laser-focused precision that cuts straight to the psychological core of their behavior. What were you hoping would happen when you said that? What response were you looking for with that comment? Did you intend for that to sound dismissive, or did it come out differently than you planned? These questions do something remarkable. They shift the entire focus of the interaction from your reaction to their intention. They move the spotlight from you as target to them as aggressor, and they do it without accusation, without defensiveness, without emotional escalation. Just pure, genuine seeming curiosity about the psychological mechanics behind their rudeness. Most people have absolutely no prepared response for this kind of questioning. They expect defensiveness, they expect hurt, they expect counterattacks, they have ready-made responses. For all of these, what they don't expect, what they have no script for, is someone calmly inquiring about the motivation behind their behavior, as if studying an interesting psychological case. This approach is particularly effective because it forces a moment of self-reflection that most rude people desperately avoid. It makes them briefly see themselves through an outside perspective, a profoundly uncomfortable experience for those accustomed to focusing only on others' reactions. But the delivery is everything. These questions must come from a place of genuine curiosity, not passive-aggressive accusation. The moment they detect sarcasm or hostility in your questioning, you've lost the power of this approach. Practice asking these questions with the authentic interest of someone who genuinely wants to. Rude person. This is someone who is perfectly pleasant to you one-on-one, but becomes 1. Others may not see the pattern if they only witness the public interactions. 2. If you call it out, you risk looking oversensitive since they can point to your positive, private interactions. 3. The contrast between their private and public behavior makes you question your own perceptions. With this type of rudeness, documentation becomes your most powerful tool, not to create a gotcha moment, but to establish the pattern so clearly that it can't be denied or dismissed. Start keeping a simple log of interactions. Note the date, who was present, what was said, and the tone approach used. Do this consistently over time without emotion, just factual. Documentation. When you have enough data to establish a clear pattern, you can address it privately with what I call the pattern observation. I've noticed something interesting in our interactions. When we speak one-on-one, your feedback is consistently constructive and collegial. In group settings, I've observed a different pattern where comments tend to be more dismissive or critical. I'm curious about that. Contrast. This approach accomplishes several things. It focuses on the pattern rather than any single incident, making it harder to dismiss. It contrasts their positive capability, the constructive one-on-one interactions, with their negative behavior, the public dismissiveness, and it expresses genuine curiosity about the pattern rather than accusation. This often results in one of three outcomes. 1. They become aware of a behavior pattern they weren't fully conscious of and work to align their public behavior with their private interactions. 2. They deny the pattern, at which point you can calmly refer to your specific documented examples. 3. They reveal that the behavior is indeed intentional, giving you clear information about who you're really dealing with. Any of these outcomes is valuable. Either the behavior improves or you gain clarity about the nature of the relationship and can make decisions accordingly. Now, let's talk about handling rudeness from people in positions of authority. The boss who humiliates you in meetings. The parent who makes dismissive comments at family gatherings. The client who speaks to you condescendingly. These situations require special consideration because the power dynamic adds complexity. You can't simply respond as you would to a peer without considering potential consequences. This is where what I call respectful redirection becomes essential. This approach acknowledges their position while still maintaining your dignity. It looks like this. I'm committed to the success of this project/relationship/outcome, and I can contribute most effectively when feedback is delivered privately and specifically. Would it be possible for us to discuss your concerns in that format? This response does several things simultaneously. It affirms your commitment to shared goals, establishing that you're not being resistant or difficult. It clearly states the conditions under which you can perform at your best, and it offers a constructive alternative that allows them to maintain their authority while adjusting their approach. The key is framing your boundary not as a personal preference or emotional need, but as a practical matter of effectiveness and results. This makes it much harder for them to dismiss, especially in professional contexts. If they continue with public rudeness despite this redirect, you can escalate to what I call the documented redirect. As I mentioned, I want to address your concerns fully, and I'll be sending a follow-up email to schedule a time for us to discuss them in detail. That will allow me to give them the serious attention they deserve. This accomplishes two crucial things. It creates a record of both their behavior and your professional response to it, and it clearly signals that while you respect their authority, you also expect basic professional courtesy in return. Let's talk about something few people understand: the enormous power of calm in the face of rudeness. Not forced calm, not repressed emotion disguised as calm, but genuine, centered. Their rudeness created no internal ripple at all. This state isn't easily faked. It comes from truly recognizing that their behavior has nothing to do with your worth and everything to do with their limitations. From genuinely seeing their rudeness as their problem rather than yours. From this authentic center, even the simplest response carries remarkable power. I understand that's your perspective. I hear what you're saying. That's one way to see it. These simple acknowledgments delivered without defensiveness, without tension, without the subtle energy of someone working to appear calm while feeling attacked, they communicate something profound, that their rudeness has completely failed to destabilize you, and that failure, that complete non-reaction to their attempt to provoke you, it's often the most unsettling response of all to someone who uses rudeness as a tool of power or control. This is why the inner work is as important as the external techniques. All the verbal strategies in the world won't have their full power if they're delivered from a place of internal reactivity. Develop your center through daily practice. When something small bothers you, practice observing your reaction rather than immediately acting on it. Notice the physical sensations, the emotions that arise, the thoughts that follow, all without judgment, all without immediate response. This capacity to experience provocation without immediate reaction, it builds gradually, and it becomes your most powerful asset when facing rudeness in high-stakes situations. There's a specific type of rudeness that's particularly difficult to address: the just joking defense. This is when someone says something deliberately hurtful or undermining, but the moment you show any sign of being affected, they immediately respond with, "Lighten up, I was just joking." This tactic is insidious because it attempts to make your reasonable reaction to their rudeness seem like the actual problem. It positions you as overly sensitive, lacking humor, unable to take a joke, while positioning them as the fun person who everyone else understands is just playing around. It's gaslighting disguised as humor. With this type of rudeness, direct confrontation often backfires. The more seriously you take their comment, the more you play into their frame that you're the one with the problem. But ignoring it entirely allows the behavior to continue and even escalate. This is where what I call the humor mirror becomes devastatingly effective. When someone makes a rude joke at your expense, respond with a calm smile and say, "Explain why that's funny. I want to understand the humor." This simple request accomplishes something powerful. It forces them to either 1. Explicitly articulate why your humiliation or discomfort is supposedly amusing. 2. Admit it wasn't actually a joke. 3. Backpedal and try to reframe what they meant. All three outcomes work in your favor. If they try to explain why their rudeness was funny, they typically end up looking cruel or petty. If they admit it wasn't a joke, their cover is blown. If they backpedal, you've still interrupted their pattern, and you've done it all while maintaining the appearance of someone who is genuinely trying to understand, not someone who can't take a joke. Follow this with, "I've always found that actually funny jokes don't need explanation. Interesting that this one does." This observation, delivered not with anger, but with mild curiosity, strikes at the heart of their defense mechanism, while still denying them the emotional reaction they were seeking. Now, let's talk about chronic interrupters. These are people who consistently talk over you, cut you off mid-sentence, or jump in before you've finished making your point. This form of rudeness is particularly challenging because it's repeated and often happens too quickly for thoughtful response. With chronic interrupters, you need a system that addresses both the individual incidents and the overall pattern. This is where the escalating response protocol becomes essential. First interruption, the replay. When they interrupt, wait until they finish, then simply pick up exactly where you left off with, as I was saying. Do not acknowledge the interruption directly. Just continue your thought precisely where it was cut off. Second interruption, the direct naming. I notice I've been interrupted twice now. I'd like to finish my thought before responding to your points. This clearly names the behavior without accusation or emotion. Third interruption, the pattern boundary. This pattern of interrupting is making effective communication difficult. I'm going to need to finish my points without interruption, or will need to find a different format for this discussion. This escalating approach accomplishes several things. It gives them the opportunity to correct their behavior after a gentle redirect. It clearly names the behavior if it continues, and it establishes a concrete boundary with consequences if the pattern persists. The key is consistency. If you sometimes allow interruptions and other times confront them, the interrupter gets mixed signals about what's acceptable. By following this escalating protocol consistently, you train others how to communicate with you effectively. Let's address something that few people understand about these interactions: the role of cultural and subcultural norms in what's perceived as rude. What's considered rude in one cultural context might be normal or even expected in another. Direct feedback that would be offensive in some Asian cultures might be appreciated as straightforward in parts of Northern Europe. Volume and animation that would seem aggressive in certain professional settings might be standard in some family or community environments. This doesn't mean you should tolerate behavior that feels disrespectful to you, but it does suggest a slightly different approach when there might be cultural factors at play. This is where what I call the cultural bridge question becomes valuable. I've noticed that in my experience/background/professional context, that type of comment would typically be considered quite direct critical. I'm curious if in your experience there's a different understanding of how such feedback is usually delivered. This question accomplishes something sophisticated. It names the behavior as problematic within your cultural framework, while acknowledging there might be different norms at play. It expresses curiosity rather than accusation, creating space for genuine dialogue about expectations and communication styles. This approach is particularly useful in diverse workplaces, international settings, or when interacting with people from significantly different backgrounds than your own. If the person acknowledges the cultural difference, you can then move to establishing shared norms. I appreciate that perspective. For our future interactions, I'd find it most helpful if critical feedback could be delivered. Describe your preferred approach. Would that work for you? This creates a bridge between potentially different communication styles without either person having to be wrong. Now, let's talk about a particularly painful form of rudeness: being deliberately excluded or ignored in group settings. This isn't just someone saying something rude to you, it's them acting as if you're not even present or relevant to the conversation. They direct questions to everyone but you. They acknowledge everyone's contributions except yours. They make eye contact with everyone around the table except you. This behavior is often subtle enough that others might not immediately notice it, but devastating enough that you feel it acutely. With this type of rudeness, most responses only reinforce the dynamic. If you try harder to be included, you appear needy. If you call it out directly, you risk seeming oversensitive if others haven't noticed the pattern. This is where what I call the strategic inclusion move becomes powerful. Rather than trying to be included by the person excluding you, actively include others in a way that forces acknowledgement of your presence. For example, if someone is directing the conversation away from you, calmly insert with, "Sarah, I'd be interested in your thoughts on what Robert just shared. Your experience with the Henderson project seems particularly relevant here." By actively including someone else, Sarah, in response to a third-person Robert, you position yourself as a facilitator of the conversation rather than someone seeking inclusion. This role shift makes it much harder for the excluding person to continue their pattern without it becoming obvious to everyone. Follow this with direct questions to others that reference knowledge or perspective you uniquely have. "Michael, how do you see this connecting with the approach we discussed last Thursday during our strategy session?" This accomplishes two things simultaneously. It demonstrates your relevance to the conversation through your specific knowledge, and it creates a social expectation for Michael to respond directly to you, breaking the exclusion pattern. The power of this approach is that rather than trying to counter exclusion directly, you simply adopt a position within the conversation that makes continued exclusion socially awkward and increasingly obvious if it persists. Let's address something critical that most advice completely misses: recovery strategies for when you've initially responded poorly to rudeness. Because let's be honest, sometimes you get caught off guard. Sometimes the rude comment lands before you can implement any of these techniques. Sometimes your immediate reaction is emotional rather than strategic. What then? Is the opportunity lost? Is there no way to regain your footing once you've initially stumbled? Absolutely not. This is where what I call the reset button becomes invaluable. If you've responded emotionally or ineffectively to rudeness, you can reset the interaction with, "I want to revisit what happened earlier. My immediate response wasn't as clear as I would have liked. What I actually want to communicate is..." This reset accomplishes several important things. It acknowledges your initial reaction without apologizing for being affected by their rudeness. It demonstrates self-awareness and emotional regulation, the ability to recalibrate after an initial reaction, and most importantly, it gives you a second chance to respond from a more centered, strategic place. The key is the timing. This reset works best after a short break in the interaction, perhaps after a meeting has moved to a new agenda item or after a conversation has shifted topics. Going back too immediately can seem like continuation of an emotional reaction. Waiting too long can make it seem like you've been ruminating excessively. The ideal timing is what I call the next natural juncture, the first appropriate moment when returning to the topic doesn't seem forced or obsessive. This ability to reset, to essentially give yourself a second chance at an effective response, is one of the most valuable skills you can develop in handling rudeness. Because the reality is, perfect in the moment responses are rare. The ability to circle back effectively is often what truly determines the outcome of these challenging interactions. Something happens in your body when someone is rude to you, a physical reaction that precedes any conscious thought. Your heartbeat quickens, your breathing gets shallow, your muscles tense, a flush of heat might rush to your face. Time seems to slow down and speed up. Simultaneously, this physiological response, it isn't weakness, it's your nervous system doing exactly what it evolved to do, preparing you for a threat. The problem is, this response was designed for physical dangers, not social ones. It's optimized for running from predators, not responding to Karen in accounting who just undermined you in the budget meeting. Understanding this gap between what your body is doing and what the situation actually requires is critical to mastering these interactions. Because here's what most people don't realize. You don't need to suppress this physiological response. You need to channel it, to redirect it, to use that sudden surge of energy strategically, rather than letting it hijack your behavior. This is what I call the alchemical response, transforming that instinctive fight or flight energy into focused presence and strategic clarity. It starts with recognition. The moment you feel that physical response beginning, the quickened heartbeat, the shallow breathing, silently name it to yourself. This is my threat. Response activating. This is adrenaline. This is my body trying to protect me. This naming does something powerful. It creates a small but crucial gap between the physiological reaction and your behavioral response. It gives you a moment of choice. Next, consciously direct your attention to your breathing, not to control it or change it yet, just to observe it. Notice the shallow, quick pattern. Now deliberately slow it down. Take one deep breath that fills your lower belly. Feel your diaphragm expand downward. Exhale slowly through slightly pursed lips. This breathing shift doesn't just calm you psychologically, it literally changes your biochemistry. It activates your parasympathetic nervous system, countering the adrenaline spike and bringing your prefrontal cortex, the strategic, rational part of your brain, back online. From this more centered state, you can now choose your response rather than being driven by pure reactive impulse. But here's where most advice stops, at helping you calm down. That's only half the equation. The next step is to actually use that redirected energy, the adrenaline coursing through your system. It's enhancing your focus, your speed of thought, your access to immediate memory. These are advantages if you channel them correctly. So rather than trying to completely dissipate that energy, direct it toward heightened awareness. Notice more details about the person who was rude, their exact phrasing, their tone, their body language, the reaction of others present. Gather data with the enhanced perception that your physiological state is providing. This observational focus accomplishes two things simultaneously. It gives your energy somewhere productive to go, and it provides you with valuable information for crafting your response. Now, let's talk about something that can be particularly powerful, the strategic walk away. Not as an emotional reaction, not as an avoidance mechanism, but as a deliberate power move. When someone is rude to you, they're seeking engagement, some form of response, even. Negative reactions give them a sense of impact, of significance in your world. What if, instead, you simply removed yourself from the interaction entirely, not dramatically, not angrily, but with calm deliberation that communicates a clear message? Your behavior doesn't meet my standards for continued interaction. It looks like this. When someone makes a rude comment, you maintain eye contact for a moment, give a small nod of acknowledgement that you heard them, and then simply say, "I think we're done here for now," before gathering your things and leaving calmly. No explanation, no justification, no opportunity for them to respond or pull you back into engagement. This move is particularly powerful because it denies them the thing they want most, your emotional engagement with their rudeness. It communicates something devastatingly clear. Their behavior doesn't even merit your continued attention, let alone your emotional energy. But the strategic walk away requires something most people struggle with, the willingness to leave conversations unfinished, to allow matters to remain temporarily unresolved, to be comfortable with the open loop that your departure creates, that comfort with unresolved tension. It's a rare quality, and it communicates profound confidence to everyone observing the interaction. Now let me address something specific about handling rudeness in professional environments. The tremendous power of written documentation. When someone is repeatedly rude to you in a workplace setting contemporaneous, documentation becomes one of your most powerful tools, not as preparation for some dramatic confrontation, but as a methodical building of a case that can be presented if necessary. Start keeping a simple record. Date, time, what was said, who else was present. Do this without emotion, just factual observation of what occurred. This documentation serves several purposes. First, it helps you identify patterns you might not otherwise notice. Is the rudeness more common in certain contexts, with certain topics, when particular others are present? Second, it provides you with specific examples when you do choose to address the behavior. Not vague feelings or impressions, but concrete incidents that can't be easily dismissed or denied. Third, it creates an objective record that can be shared with appropriate authorities if the behavior crosses into harassment or creates a hostile work environment. But perhaps most valuably, the act of documentation itself changes your relationship to the rudeness. It transforms you from victim to observer, from reactive recipient to methodical analyst. This shift in perspective gives you psychological distance from the emotional impact of their behavior. You're no longer just experiencing their rudeness, you're studying it, cataloging it. This slight perspective shift often provides just enough emotional separation to respond more strategically in the moment. Now, let's talk about a specific category of rudeness that many find particularly challenging: the deliberate misinterpretation. This is when someone takes what you've said and twists it into something you clearly didn't mean, often something worse or more extreme. So what you're really saying is, I guess you think everyone who disagrees with you is just. It sounds like you're suggesting we should always. These deliberate distortions are designed to put you on the defensive, to make you scramble to clarify what you really meant, effectively derailing your original point and putting them in control of the conversation. With this type of rudeness, your response needs to firmly but calmly reject their framing, without getting pulled into detailed explanation. This is where what I call the clear rejection becomes powerful. No, that's not what I said or what I meant. What I actually said was brief restatement of your actual point. I'd appreciate it if you'd address my actual words rather than your interpretation of them. This response does several things simultaneously. It clearly rejects their distortion without apology or excessive explanation. It restates your actual position succinctly to refocus the conversation, and it explicitly names their behavior as misinterpretation rather than legitimate engagement. The key is delivering this with calm certainty rather than defensiveness, not as someone desperately trying to clarify a misunderstanding, but as someone setting a standard for how their words will be treated in conversation. This approach is particularly effective because it denies them the extended back and forth over, meaning that they're trying to provoke. It refuses to accept their framing as the new topic of discussion. It maintains your control over your own words and their intended meaning, and when delivered with calm certainty, it makes the deliberate nature of their misinterpretation visible to everyone involved in the conversation. Let me share something powerful about handling rudeness that most people never realize: the tremendous impact of your expectations. Because here's the truth: the people who handle rudeness most effectively aren't just responding differently, they're expecting differently. Most people are shocked by rudeness, caught off guard, temporarily destabilized by the unexpected social violation. This momentary destabilization is precisely what gives the rude person their advantage. But what if you expected rudeness as one of several possible human behaviors? Not fearfully, not pessimistically, but realistically. What if, rather than being shocked when it occurs, your inner response was more like, ah, there it is, option C, rudeness, interesting choice. This expectation shift accomplishes something profound. It eliminates the momentary advantage that rudeness usually creates through surprise. You're not shocked because this was always one of the possibilities you were prepared for. From this prepared stance, you can implement any of the techniques we've discussed, but you're doing it from a place of readiness rather than recovery. You're responding from your center rather than scrambling to find it. As we come to the end of this journey together, I want you to understand something fundamental about rudeness that changes everything. Truly rude people, they aren't just making isolated comments. They're not just having a bad day. They're testing boundaries. They're seeing what they can get away with. They're determining whether you're someone who can be safely disrespected without consequence. Every time you freeze, every time you laugh it off awkwardly, every time you pretend it didn't hurt, you're sending a clear message. Yes, this works on me. Yes, I can be treated this way. But from this moment forward, that changes, because now you understand that responding to rudeness isn't about having the perfect comeback. It's not about being clever or cutting or cruel in return. It's about something far more powerful, establishing with crystal clarity that you are not someone who accepts disrespect. You have the tools now, the strategic silence, the precise questioning, the calm redirection, the boundary setting, the pattern observation, the expectation management. These aren't just techniques, they're declarations of your worth. When you respond to rudeness with composed precision rather than flustered emotion, you're not just winning a single interaction, you're rewiring how people perceive you, how they approach you, how they speak about you when you're not in the room. Remember this, the way you respond to rudeness today determines how you'll be treated tomorrow. Each interaction is training the people around you how to engage with you going forward. So stand tall, breathe deep, look them in the eye, and show them with your words, with your demeanor, with your unwavering presence, that while they may have begun this interaction, you will determine how it ends. That's how you leave a rude person speechless, not just once, but permanently.